got to teach Special Forces medics, which is a pretty cool thing. I got to jump out of airplanes for a couple of years with the Navy SEALs and the Army Rangers and the Green Berets. That was really eye-opening. I share with you because what I hope to share with you tonight is the aperture that's opened so wide for me. So coming from a kid from Portage, Indiana, steel mill town, never would have expected to travel most of the country and some of the world and meet people from all different backgrounds and cultures. Probably another thing to share with you, I got to work as adjunct faculty member at the University of Miami on the trauma training team. That was a congressionally mandated fellowship set up by the Army. The Air Force is in Maryland shock trauma, the Navy's out in Los Angeles, we're in Miami. And again, another fascinating career opportunity because just 1 year later I'd find myself in Baghdad, Iraq with some of the youngest nurses in the Army. I took 11 nurses that had never stepped foot in the emergency room. They couldn't spell ER, is what I like to say sometimes. But they did very, very well. But I was prepared, luckily, because of these unique jobs I had to hopefully lead them in there. And we had a lot of really challenging years. 2005 to 2006, if you look back on it, was the bloodiest year of the Iraq War. We saw about 6,000 trauma patients, average about 19 a day until the Baghdad offensive kicked off, and it went up to 26 a day. So we had to adjust really on the fly, especially the young nurses and medics I took. But the reason I'm here today is to talk to you about trying to find your life calling and your why. I stole that phrase from Simon Sinek. How many people know who Simon Sinek is? Okay, a few of you. If you get a chance, you should watch his TED Talk. It's really fascinating. It talks about why Apple is such a unique company. All right? It's not about what they do, it's about why they do it. And I think I was very fortunate I found my calling by serving in the Army. So here's a few objectives I'm going to focus on. I plan on speaking about 30 to 40 minutes, and then I would love to take some questions, and the harder the better, please. Again, this is my 30th year. I was talking to your professor, and mentorship, the third objective there, really has saved my career. You don't need mentors when things are going well. You need mentors when you get in trouble. And I'll give you a few testimonials of that throughout this talk. So I'm here for you. People think even in my own command that I'm too busy to help them, but I tell them think of me as a library. If I don't know the answer to something, I have friends all over the country. Some of them now are general officers that I can call and help get a question answered for you. And I'm never too busy to answer an email. And more than answer an email, I'd rather have a phone call from you. So I'm going to start off talking about character. You guys have a big leg up on me. I am not the spiritual-based person that my children are, that my wife is, and you guys chose a college that has a spiritual base. So your character is going to carry you a lot of ways that you are going to have a leg up on your peers. And I'll talk about how I can give you examples of that throughout my career. Organizational values are paramount to what you do. Don't expect to hit a home run first time out of the gate, especially coming out of school. I hate to break your bubble, but the hardest work you're going to do is not behind you, it's in front of you. Okay, one of my best friends is a HR specialist for a big hospital company on the West Coast. And I asked him, well, what should I tell this group? And he said, tell them, I really don't care about the degree. Don't care. I really don't care. He said, it doesn't matter to me. It gets them in the door, gets them to interview with me. He said, if they have a master's degree, their undergraduate degree, I don't even look at. And truthfully, I can tell you the same. I've interviewed hundreds of people. If you have a master's degree, I don't even care where your undergraduate degree is from. What I do care about is how you can relate and how you can talk to people. And more importantly, you should be interviewing people than them interviewing you. Like I'm getting ready to go out in the world. I have lots of offers right now to go talk to, work for people. It really doesn't matter how much money they're going to pay me. But it's if those values are equal to the values I've been used to for the last 30 years in the Army. And a common vision is important. You should really think long and hard before you go interview for a company what you're willing to accept. And again, don't think you're going to have to hit it out of the ballpark the first time. All right, do we have any reservists in the audience or any soldiers that have been in the service? None? Okay, well these are our Army values. And it kind of spells out leadership if you look at the first letter of the acronym. Of course, having integrity is above all, and in your field particularly. One of the things I think Maggie's going to do really well, and she would not tell a lie if you tortured her. So I'm telling you, that is going to be important for you guys. To go in and speak to an employer and look them in the eyes and answer some of these hard... The questions are getting fantastic, by the way. I mean, tell me the most embarrassing moment you've ever had. You better be ready to be honest about that. Because if you come up with a fake, insincere, inauthentic, embarrassing moment, I can tell in the first 5 seconds you open your mouth. But if you get blushed, you're uncomfortable, you're embarrassed, and you tell me the truth, it could be you robbed a bank. You're going to get big points from me, okay, because you told me something that's true. Duty, respect, selfless service, I mean, these are things we measure our soldiers on all the time. Probably one of the things I love the most is personal courage. And I'm going to talk a little bit in this talk about taking risk, taking calculated risk. And this is one of the areas I'm particularly struggling with, and I'd like to hear your feedback maybe with some of the questions. Because a lot of my young nurses are your age. And if you know getting into nursing school, it takes an incredible academic achievement now. Like you have to have like 3.5 or above just to get into nursing school, right? And then right now we're downsizing a little bit in the Army because we over-assessed when the war was hot and heavy. So every other nurse that goes up for captain, which is, so you know the ranks, it's not going to be a test, but second lieutenant, first lieutenant, captain, major, lieutenant colonel, colonel, then you have stars, 1, 2, 3, 4. When I came in the Army, it was a given to become a captain. Right now, we're letting every other captain go. So I want you to think about how you can help me. How do I instill risk-taking into a young person who had to have a 3.5 or above to get into nursing school, that knows every other one of them, the person to the left or right, is going to not get picked up for captain? That's a tough gate to hit. I probably would be reluctant to take risks. But taking calculated risk is really, really important to growing as a leader. And it was huge for me. Some of the most important jobs I ever got were because I told my boss I didn't respect what they were doing, or I didn't think their judgment was very well. And I think this translates into the business world. So too many people think it's important for you to support your boss. It is important. But what's more important is for you to support the organization. And let me give you an example. So I had a commander who was threatening my career with some paperwork, and I challenged him and said, "You're the problem, not me. And if you keep going down this lane, you're going to get relieved. The first investigation that comes, no matter what it is, it could be EO, it could be ethical, it could be whatever. Nobody's going to come to your defense." Okay? That was a line in the sand I drew with him. And in the end, after he reflected and thought about it, he came back to me and thanked me for, quote, saving his career, because the way he was speaking to his people were in just such a disrespectful manner, it wasn't going to work. Again, you see a suit or you see a uniform on me, 80% of the people that I supervise in a 5,500 employee hospital don't wear a uniform. They're unionized federal civilians. You need to know management-employee relation law. You need to know how to negotiate. You need to know how to counsel people properly. So it's not I can just order people take that hill or see those patients and they're going to go do that. That doesn't happen. So you really have to have personal courage, and you have to be well-rounded to be able to lead a lot of different people. So my biggest thing is selfless service. This is a picture of me leaving to go to Iraq in 2005. That's actually Isabel, who's sitting in the audience. And I remember her just like falling in my arms. It was like a wet noodle, like, oh, this is just awful. But I knew I was going to do something that was bigger than myself. I knew I was going to help serve our country. I knew I was going to go out there and try to bring back as many soldiers as I could bring back. It didn't matter what my politics were. For the record, we don't even talk politics in the Army. We serve whatever Commander-in-Chief is our Commander-in-Chief, and that's something that we pledge loyalty to. But finding something bigger than yourself is really, really important. And when you can find a team of people that can do that, that's even more special. I'm going to give you a list of some of my favorite books at the end, and just because I mentioned the word team. Team of Teams by General McChrystal. Has anybody read that book? Fantastic read. 4-star general, whose background is mostly special operations, he took the paradigm and just flipped it on its head. When people came in to brief him, instead of calling them by their rank, he called them by their first name. And now he's leading this really big think tank in Washington about just how to think differently. He insists everybody in a meeting that he sits in speaks out loud. They have to think out loud. And when you are listening to each other think out loud, it's a force multiplier. We call that in the Army. You can just hear where people are going. Everything's transparent. It's just a totally different way of thinking. But if you get a chance, Team of Teams by General McChrystal is really a good read. So Quint Studer runs a company called the Studer Company. It's the second highest employee satisfaction company in the country. Does anybody know what the number one is?
Employee satisfaction?
Yeah, employee satisfaction. People just guess Google or Apple.
Selfless.
It's actually USAA Insurance, and they service military folks. Quinn Studer came out of Chicago. Now he has a virtual company out of Florida. He works with over 300 large hospital organizations in the country, and his favorite quote is that, "Culture eats strategy and processes lunch every time." So what does that mean, right? I have been in a number of organizations where we go off-site, and we change the vision, and we change the mission of our and we come back and we hand out new ID cards for every employee. We make them memorize it. It really doesn't change the culture. What changes the culture is when you have leaders at the top of it who actually demonstrate how to change that culture, that are transparent. I'm fortunate to work for a guy named Mike Place right now. South Dakota boy. His family said you can do anything you want at 18, just can't be in the house. So he found a scholarship to Johns Hopkins. So he's a Hopkins grad. He's going to be a general officer in the next few months. And he's a family practitioner by trade, but he's one of the most humble guys you ever want to meet. He has set the standard so I don't even have to go to him for guidance anymore. I know what his answers to any difficult question are going to be. And as I'll speak in a little bit, as importantly, if I make a mistake, he's going to cover me. That's huge, right? If any of you played sports, right, you know you want to make a mistake. You know you want your teammates to stick up and back you up, right? That's the game of life you're going into. The more you're able to work as a team, the better off you're going to be. This is another famous quote by Maya Angelou, but I actually learned it from a guy named Captain Dave Watkins, who was a 5th Special Forces Group physician assistant. He looked like Mr. Clean, had a big nasty scar running down his face. And he used to tell the graduating class of Special Forces medics, remember, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. I could have the ticket to the lottery, but if I'm a jerk and treat you poorly, you're not going to listen to me. But if I get to know who you are, the first thing I do when I meet the union president is we take them out to lunch and we talk about nothing related to work. I ask them about their family, I ask them how many kids they have, why they're working for the federal government. I hope they'll ask me the same thing, because I know we're going to get into tough negotiations. I'm an emergency nurse by background, as I said. There's another famous line that says, never meet for the first time at a disaster. So when you have mass casualty events, the last thing you want to do is meet the fire chief, meet the police chief, meet everybody at a disaster. You want to build those relationships ahead of time so that you know what's going on. I think one of the reasons we were successful, we had about 12 mass casualties that I was the triage officer in Baghdad. And I have, again, been an emergency nurse for a long time. And I've seen different plans written. I don't know how to run a perfect mass casualty, but I can tell you how to run a bad one. Change the key people at the time the mass casualty happens. If you go and look at a lot of hospital plans, you'll find that. Like the person who's running the emergency room, when there's a mass cal, some administrator will come from high above and come down and take over. What that does is just confuses the team. So I was a triage officer for every mass cal, and they could tell in my voice when I was getting nervous, or I was getting excited, or I was worried. It wasn't a new voice, it wasn't a new team. So just remember, the quicker you can build relationships, the faster your team's going to work to the highest efficiency. So this is a great book called Patients Come Second. We just had to read this for our entire region. Our Major General out in Hawaii made us read this. There's also a famous leader by the name of Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was an Allied Forces commander, but also president, who used to say, take your job seriously, but not yourself. Okay? You'll find a lot of people take themselves really seriously. Those are the people I put it at arm's length. And my favorite line to distance them is just tell them, I'm uncomfortable with you. I used to tell people I don't trust them, but that's too much, right? And if you have to, as young as you are, triangulate it. Because the hardest step you're going to make, this goes back to my friend, Sergeant Major Mayhew, who runs this huge HR business on the West Coast. The hardest thing you're going to go through is right now. You're going to go through with direct care. A lot of you are probably waiters, waitresses, working firsthand with people. You're going to go into management. And as a young person, I can tell you, it's very difficult to manage people who may be your parents' age, right? But you have to figure out how to build that relationship. But if you can laugh at yourself, and when you make mistakes, admit them, and admit them quickly. People are very forgiving. But if they think you, again, the classic example is a West Point second lieutenant coming to the Army. If you don't listen to your soldiers, your non-commissioned officers, they're going to let you walk into walls. But if you tell them, hey, I don't know what I'm doing, I need your help, they're going to make sure you get on the first aircraft into theater, they're going to make sure you sleep in a warm place, they're going to make sure you get warm food, and next thing you know, people, that goes viral. People don't realize what's going around. There's a book called Give and Take, and I have a list of my reading at the end here so you guys can copy it down. Guy ran Baxter Pharmaceutical Company, big pharmaceutical company. And he developed relationships all through his transition up to the CEO. And it was fascinating. When he wanted to give a brief to the CEO came out and said, I've just resigned. And I've recommended you take my place. He's like, what are you talking about? He said, you have built relationships all across this organization. Everybody gave it a unanimous vote. So there's example after example in business, example after example in the military that shows those people who build relationships are going to get to the highest level. And it's not anything to do with your academic standing. By the way, 2.7, 5-year plan. I love to see my daughter's face when I say that. Okay, I would not be a nurse this day, keep competing against your contemporaries. But that also kind of worries me. Like, who didn't make it in because they couldn't make that academic mark? Right? Because other soft skills, I think, are as important or probably more important. I'm going to try and show this video, and I hope it's not, the audio's not working. This is just an example of how to have fun downrange. Okay? So we had a very stressful time, and thankfully somebody made a copy of April Fool's Day. So I got woken up about 6 in the morning, and they said, hey, sir, you got to take a medevac flight from Baghdad to Balad with a person with a brain injury. So I went in, and this poor person in the middle is one of my second lieutenants, who I jokingly referred to, saying they couldn't spell ER. So just let's kind of watch and see what happens to her. This is only about a 30-second clip. If the noise comes on, I got to turn it off because there's a lot of profanity in this, okay? All right, let's see if we get this work. So I'll stop it there because you can hear the audio. So basically what happens is poor Natalie Skates dies on this patient to help Colonel Groves, right? It was just all made out fake, okay? And she's so embarrassed. But what did we do right after that? We got the chaplain. We brought the chaplain down. He gave last rites to the patient. And we just continued all through the day. So if you think about it, we're in a bad situation, right? But we found a way to laugh at ourselves. And it's one of the highlights of, remember, whenever I run into these guys, this girl right now is a rock star. She's working at Fort Bragg. She's a flight nurse there, doing things I would never have imagined her doing. She's just killing it. So a little bit more on personal growth. I like this here, Simon Sinek. I already talked about what he does. We don't just trust people to obey the rules, we also trust that they know when to break them. Now this is so counterintuitive, I think, to most people. I've always been kind of an anarchist. My father went to Woodstock, my mother went to Woodstock. Other than these gentlemen and ladies in the front row, does anybody know what Woodstock is? Okay, a couple. All right. So I'm really old, that's what it says. My parents were not the typical people. Like, you would never expect me to go in the military. My father and mother were not that way. But breaking rules, my father broke a lot of rules. He stood up for a lot of people. I saw him break up fights and stuff in parking lots. Like, what are you doing getting involved with that, Dad? You know? He just thought, he would always say, that ain't right. So he did instill something to me about standing up for others. And I think that's one of the things really, really wonderful and powerful about what you're achieving. You're getting a degree. You're going to go into an organization. They're going to give you quote-unquote power. Like, the thing I realized when I became a second lieutenant is I can stick up for the sergeant. Right? The surgeon comes down and says something stupid to them. I go, hold on, he don't work for you. He works for me. That is powerful. You're building teams right from the get-go. And the people see you're going to stick your neck out for them, they'll jump in front of a train for you. I've had soldiers come to me and tell me, I'd take a bullet for you. I'm like, I don't need you to take a bullet for me. It's nice that you say that, but that's the kind of loyalty and that's the kind of team you're looking to work for. So this is really interesting. One of my boss's favorite lines right now is high-performing organizations need fewer rules. Poor-performing organizations need a whole lot of rules. So just take that as a measure when you go to interview for a job. Hey, let me see your SOPs, your standard operating procedures. Let me see what rules you have. They got a whole lot of rules. I'm probably steering clear of that organization. But if they don't have a lot of rules and they trust you and they allow you to make mistakes and move on from that, that's when you really want to get something done. That's how the people at Google and that's the people at Apple have gone on to do what they've done. They have desegregated the responsibility down to the first line people. Colin Powell's number 9 tenet of leadership is the people in the front lines are right until proven otherwise. And if you keep that in mind, that's another great, great line. Like, how can I, sitting in the command suite of a 5,500 person hospital, even imagine, even with 20 years of emergency nursing experience, how can I even imagine I know more than the people that are working in the emergency room today? I can't. There's no way, right? They know what's right, and if they make a mistake, again, be prepared to cover them. I had a mentor, who, by the way, looks a lot like your professor, who covered me all the time. I should have gotten thrown out of the Army at least 3 or 4 times for disrespecting other people, but she knew I was doing it for my team. It wasn't about John Groves. So, as you go into business, think about being accountable to your organization and not your leader, and also think about raising what I call in the healthcare industry, raising the patient care flag first. You're going to get into arguments with people, but if you make it about you and they make it about them, nobody's going to win. But if you make it about the goals of the organization, we like to say in healthcare, if I make it about the patient, it's really hard to lose an argument, right? If I say that patient over there needs this and this done because of that, the people in logistics are going to have a hard time saying they can't supply that. But if I go to them and say, you're lazy and you're not getting your work done on time, it's not going to be a starter. So think about that. Whoever raises the patient care flag first hardly ever loses an argument. So Bob Gates has served 7 different administrations. Fascinating book called Duty, if you ever want to read that book. He talks all the time to graduating members of the Naval Academy, West Point, Air Force Academy. And one of the favorite things he says is something to avoid and be dangerous about groupthink. Like, I'm not saying you have to argue with everybody, but challenge authority. I mean, I'm standing here in a uniform telling you I challenged authority a lot. And it got me into positions. I got fired from a job in the emergency room, and I got pulled up to be what's called an S3, or an operations officer, in Fort Carson, Colorado, because I asked somebody, when do you guys get to work around here? I go to work every day at 6:30, I give report, 3 hours later I'm getting questions, what did you say at 6:30? And I got tired of it. And I was only a little major back then, but somebody got to the commander and said, hey, this guy Groves, he's not afraid to tell you when you're wrong. So the commander pulled me up to his office to be his, like, COO of the hospital. I didn't know what an S3 even did. I never heard of an S3, right? It's an operations officer. But he told me, I need somebody to tell me the truth. I said, that's what S3 does? He said, yeah. I said, I can do that. So, pretty easy. But I wouldn't have got there if I just would have been going along with the crowd, like, oh, you're always right, sir, you're always right. I'd only been in that job 3 weeks, and I got fired from that ER and got moved to S3. And he ended up being a 2-star general. So as we talk a little bit about mentorship, how exciting is that? I'm friends with a 2-star general, and I would need his friendship when I went to Baghdad. So just a little bit more about Robert Gates. Very humble guy, then the professor, or the chancellor at the University of Texas. If you ever hear him speak, it just exudes humility. And he was the Secretary of Defense during one of the toughest times of the war, and it just crushed him that many of the UT, or the, let me get this right, Texas A&M students who commissioned as a chancellor ended up going to the war and dying. And he really carries a heavy burden in his life. But a very, very insightful guy and a great, great book to read. So I talked a little bit about this already. Basically, this is saying cover your people. If you stand in front of your people and take a hit, I had a major once tell me, I can't remember the other 2 things, but he said, there's 3 things I'll never forget about working for you, Colonel Groves. I'm like, what's that? 1, 2, and the third one was, you took responsibility for our mistakes even when they weren't yours. I was like, well, that's my job. I'm a lieutenant colonel, you're a major. Why would I not? But you didn't even know about the decisions that were made. I said, I know. And what did that do for you? And his answer was what? I'm going to take a lot more risk, right? I'm going to push the envelope. I'm going to make decisions. You know how much faster the organization works when the people at the front line can make decisions? They don't say, oh, hold on a second, let me ask my higher. Let me make a phone call, right? As long as you know what the boss is thinking, you're going to take tremendous risk and you're going to do great things for the organization. So this is something I have learned more and more as I've gotten older. I've talked about 3 or 4 books already. Again, even though 2.7 I can read, I read about 4 books a year, maybe 5 books a year, and I think you should choose them very wisely. There's a lot of really key leaders that will publish their reading list on the net. Go look and see what those guys read. What they're reading is obviously shaping them. And the other thing is, it's the people you meet, so the relationships you build. So I'm going to start moving this talk quickly to how relationship building has been so important to me. Charlie Rose is a late night talk show host, and his favorite question is, tell me what you know about your craft that I'll never understand. I can take up a conversation with anybody. I met a son of a Tuskegee Airman in Atlanta Airport coming over here. And I had actually sat next to another son of a Tuskegee Airman early in my career. Just asked him, what did your father teach you? What were those things like? What do you remember? I mean, be intellectually curious. It's going to only make you grow and make you better. So 2 of my most favorite books for especially starting out, you guys should read Outliers. So that's the famous 10,000 hours of any profession makes you an expert. It's very easy to relate to. It talks about Bill Gates, Michael Jordan. It wasn't by accident they became the experts they are. They actually got the work done. And I actually was in the Army about 14 years. I came home to my wife in Miami and said, I don't think I know everything, but I think I may have seen about everything in the emergency room. And when that book came out, it actually validated that I had spent about 10,000 hours at my craft. But why is that important for you starting out? Give yourself a break. You're going to make mistakes, right? You're not an expert yet. Don't expect to be hitting the ball out of the park. And if somebody is poking you every time you make a mistake, maybe you should think twice about wanting to stay with that company, right? I know there's 2 types of people that work well under stress. They both have special and operations in their name. Special operations guys, we scream and yell at them because they're the independent doctor on an 8-man special forces team. They need to know everything without anybody else around. The other one is operations are surgeons. We train surgeons that way, still to this day. They are very, very tough. But the rest of us, not so much, right? Not life and death every day. It doesn't need to be that hard. So Blink, one of the main take-home points from this is we have come to confuse information with understanding. Blink takes a lot of different examples about how people who have a good gut judgment and instinct about people really are the leaders that you want to be around and the ones you want to run your organizations. But we are so inundated with information now. I read somewhere where somebody said we don't even think about wondering what an answer to a question is anymore, right? We just Google it, right? We don't wait 5 minutes to find out what the question. 20 years ago we did. We had to wait. So just remember, too much information sometimes doesn't always equate to more understanding. And this is really, really interesting. The art of business is the art of medicine. I'm a complete believer of this. As I said, I really struggled to get through school. It took me 5 years to get through, and I was distracted by all kinds of things. But over the years, I watched role models. I tried to mimic them. I tried to follow and listen to what they said, and I got better and better at my craft. And when you jump out of an airplane, they call it your circle of awareness. The first 5 or 10 times you jump, you don't see anything. Right? You just, please God, open the parachute. Right? But after a time you start, oh, I saw the plane go by. Or, oh, I saw my buddies coming down. Or your aperture gets opened wider and wider. I would ask you to continue to start looking for that. My clinical time in the emergency room, I can look across the emergency room pretty quickly and determine that's the worst patient in the room, that one's the second worst, that's the third. But it took a long time to get that arc down. So I ask you to look for role models in your school business, look for role models in jobs you take, and watch what they learn and ask them questions. They can shave off the learning curve in big time ways. So we do something at Madigan called the Arbinger Mindset. It's an outward thinking model. It's basically trying to figure out what is it you need that I can help you get to so that we can both win. It sounds simple, but we get what's called locked in a box a lot of times. People say something and you're totally disagreeing with them, and next thing you know, you're in a box. And they could have the winning lottery ticket number again, and you'd walk away. So really think about forgiving those people. Like, try to not become friends with those folks, certainly, but surround yourself with open-minded thinking, because they're only going to make you grow. As I said, books and people are going to make you different from this year to next year. I love this quote by Margaret Mead because I don't know much about the curriculum other than what I hear from my daughters, but I know what curriculum I went through. And there wasn't a lot of time for me to think outside the box. It was pretty rigid. And it wasn't until I met these mentors that I've talked about in my life who really opened my mind to think differently and read. So think about not how, how you're taught to think. Think about, what to think. And always be asking questions. I said, I hope when I'm done talking here in about 8 minutes, you guys have some really hard questions for me. I may not have the answers, but I will get them back to you. I have a treasure trove of friends across the country now that I've been friends and mentors with and gotten to speak with. And there's nothing more that we like to do than to pass things on. My last year in the Army, as I said, I feel this great sense of urgency to give back because I was given so much as a young officer. I want to make sure the next generation of officers gets that. So the last topic we're going to cover quickly is mentorship. And I say this about mentorship. When people leave me, I go through the line and shake their hands, and I always say to them, if I care about them, let me know if you ever get in trouble and you need me. And more than once I've had colleagues say, why do you say that? And it's because nobody needs mentors when things are going great. Right? I had a crisis in Iraq. One of my soldiers committed suicide or took a drug overdose. I got blamed for it. They were thinking about court-martialing me. My family was in crisis. It was just a terrible time. That 2-star general, who when I was a major, and I asked him, when you get to work around here, he threw a blanket over me. He didn't ask anything about what happened, except for, what can I do for your family? I said, my wife's really upset. So it would help if I called her. And so then Colonel Line called my wife and said, hey, I got his back. He's always going to have a position on my team. Think about that. My name came across what's called a blotter. That's like a police report in the military. He never asked me one time what happened. And he was willing to throw his reputation behind mine. That's leadership. That's the stuff you want to look for. And those people will stay in that foxhole because if you have to go through appeal after appeal after appeal, guess what? Now you're questioning their integrity. You're questioning their judgment. They're going to fight even harder for you. So surround yourself with those kind of people. So I have to throw some scripture in here, right? Because we're at Christian University. All right? Tony Dungy, anybody know who he is? Who? Okay? So I love this. Think about it. Jesus came down here to help us, to mentor us. When I was at UK, University of Kentucky, in grad school, and I gave a lecture on mentorship, this is 20 years ago, I said, raise your hand if you have a mentor. The only hands that went up in the room were the other Air Force, Army, and Navy nursing students and the professors. No other student had one in there. If you look at any research on mentorship, if you're still selfish thinking after this talk, you go and look at mentorship, the percentage is like 62% across every profession does better if they have a mentor. And it just makes common sense, like having a grandfather to call. Like, right? Before I change the spark plug in this car, should I do this, Grandpa? No, don't do that. Okay, thanks. And people want to give back. They want to share that with you. Relationship building, I've talked about a little bit, but Laura Trinkle is a commander, 2-time select commander from Kansas State. Very, very good friend of mine. And she says to me, whenever I ask her, what advice should I give these young people, she always says it's all about relationships, relationships, relationships. And your circle will grow and grow and grow before you even know it. And you'll have friends that will help other friends and be able to help people. And they will come and they will seek your advice and guidance. And you will be able to connect with a lot more people. Like I said, your education only gets you in the door. Be really ready for that first interview. My youngest daughter had an interview with the nursing school not too long ago. And basic stuff, I'm sure you know. But you've got to really think hard about that question you're going to ask when they ask you what questions you want to ask. Think of a very good question, because we've heard them all. Make it personal, but most importantly, make it authentic. Make it sincere as a heart attack. The obvious ones like, what would keep you from choosing me as your potential candidate? I don't really want to hear that. I want to hear something that you've done some research on my organization, that you can quote some things we're doing, and that you know the directions we're moving out to. So in conclusion, I'm going to sum this up. My mentor, who looks a lot like your professor, Lieutenant Colonel, retired Patsy Maloney, she's a doctorate prepared professor that works at the University of Washington. Her doctorate degree is from USC. She's a retired Lieutenant Colonel. She's published and she's written and she spoke all around the country. And her email little tag is Die a Novice. I just love that. Right? She's 20 years older than me, and she still wants to die a novice in some field of expertise. Be fearless. People can smell, I was going to say a coward, that's not the right word, but they can smell somebody that's kissing your butt a mile away. And the higher up you get in an organization like mine, the more filters get between me and the truth, right? I would much rather walk through the pharmacy and somebody, hey, how's it going today? Everybody, oh, it's great, sir, it's great. The one guy says, you know what? My knees are aching me every day because we don't have enough of these pads. Why can't you get me more pads? I'm going to move out and help that guy because he has the moral courage to speak up. Even if you're wrong, having the moral courage to speak up is going to get you huge props in most of the professions you go into. It always goes back to values. You guys, you're going to be way faster ahead of the curve than I was coming out of this school because of the values you guys have. And really try to find your life's work. So here's my life's work. This is my last slide, and I'll take some questions. This is Captain Retired Ryan Cools. He, on the 29th of November, struck an IED with his Humvee, and 2 of his soldiers were killed. He was thrown 80 meters away into a ditch of water, right up to his lip. He was still buckled onto his chair. His arm was amputated above the elbow, and his leg was amputated at the hip. When he came into us, he landed on bed 2 in Baghdad, no heartbeat, doing CPR. So for statistics, traumatic arrest, those that are not heart-related, the survival rate is less than 1%. So he'd already been in a helicopter for a few minutes, he'd been in a ditch of water, no heart rate. The grace of God, literally, we were able to get an IV in his femoral artery, which is not the right one to hit, it should be the femoral vein. We resuscitated him through the backward side of the system. We intubated him, and off he went. He had every bone in his good arm broke, every bone in his good leg broke. He had a pelvic fracture. He had what's called a retroperitoneal hematoma, which was the signature wound of the war, because when people are driving in Humvees and they get an explosion, the wounds usually start in the back. There's a lot of big blood vessels there that bust. And when you open up somebody's abdomen, they almost bleed to death before you can move the abdominal contents out of the way to get to the bleed. So he had some of the most horrific injuries. He had a bleed in his brain, he had a bleed in his lung, and he lived. And so every other year, when things weren't maybe going so well, I mentioned this court-martial thing, things weren't going so well for me, I get a Christmas card from this guy. And what's in the picture? A new baby, right? He should be dead. Then a year goes by, another Christmas card, a second baby. A year goes by, another Christmas card, another baby. So my life's work, even if I've screwed up a lot, I helped Ryan Cool get back to his family and have kids. He's testifying before Congress there. He's testifying before Congress on behalf of other soldiers. I mean, you never know how one life impacts another. And you're just getting ready for the journey. I'm so excited for you guys. Because it's just going to continue to get faster and faster and faster. But if you have the basics, if you have the character, if you continue to develop your personal growth, either by reading or meeting other people, and you find a really good mentor, and you can have more, several mentors are better than one, I'm confident you guys are going to be successful. So I'm going to close. This is my reading list. The last one on there, my commander just finished it about a week ago, and he wrote a nice note. He said all the young leaders in the Army should read it. So Extreme Ownership is a book written by 2 Navy SEALs. I can never remember their name. But they have gone on to be huge consultants for some of the largest Fortune 500 companies in America. And basically what they do is every chapter, and most of these books is one of those books. You don't have to read cover to cover. So every chapter, you read the first part, it talks about an event in Bud's training or an event in Iraq, or maybe it went well or maybe it didn't go well. And the second half of every chapter is how they took it to Coca-Cola or AT&T and helped their leaders become better. It's a quick read. I really, really enjoy it. And Adam Grant, that's the Give and Take book. I talked about the CEO of Baxter. Jack Welch is a fantastic book because it says his theory is 20% of all staff should be cut every year. Why does he think that? He thinks you've got to find your life work sooner than when you're 50. Right? The last thing you guys want to find out is you're failing at 50. Right? So the book above that, Jack Collins' Good to Great, that whole premise is there is a seat on the bus for everybody, but you might not be in the right seat to start with. So we in the Army have lots of different seats to put people in. So if you're not doing so well in this seat, we're going to put you in this seat. But we're not going to kick you off the bus. Really good book. It's probably the #1 management leadership book ever written. And I talked about Outliers. Okay, at this point I'll stop and I'll take some questions from you guys. Yes?
I have kind of a difficult question. I'm trying to correlate a couple of your talks that you presented. I really appreciate your talk, by the way. It's really inspiring. You had said, made a note to be accountable to your organization and not to your leader. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering what your advice has been as far as the military goes to officers that feel that their commander-in-chief is not being accountable to the organization as a whole, to the Constitution or the values of the country?
Good question. I'm proud of you. So, you missed the one part where I take an allegiance not to speak poorly of my commander-in-chief. Okay, so I have an opinion on that as John Groves, but as Colonel Groves, I can't speak about that because that president is going to give me orders and I'll follow them. Now, not illegal, unethical, or moral value orders, but that's probably the best way I can answer that question. I have felt strongly about all the commanders-in-chiefs I've had. All right, I've been 30 years, and I go home. It's funny you ask this question. My brothers are very vocal, and my father is very vocal about some of our presidents, and I never get engaged in the arguments because it's just not appropriate for my profession. I have a profession of arms, and then I have a profession as a nurse, and because of those two professions, if I start entering in those dialogues and I start crossing ethical lines that I can be held accountable for, and it really doesn't matter, especially when you're in war. Like we had the president come visit us several times, and Secretary Rumsfeld came in. I had strong feelings about them, but that's not going to help save another life on the battlefield that day. So if I can take that energy away from trying to focus on that and trying to focus on saving lives, I think is how I can rationalize that. That kind of makes sense?
Yeah.
Do you have a second question?
No,
That's a good one. That was a hard one. Let's continue with hard questions. Yeah, yes?
I don't know if it's really going to be hard for you to answer, but I'm just really interested in learning more about healthcare administration from military, because I'm thinking about going into that. And I just wanted to and maybe there is someone else that thinking about that as well after your speech. And so I was wondering, from your perspective of being in the hospital as long as you have, how would someone from coming out of college with a business background really succeed in becoming someone who could lead a hospital or could be actually put into that role, especially as a woman or what does it look like? What do we go through?
Yeah, it's funny you ask that because my middle daughter is not here, went and spoke to our chief of internal medicine, who's a female. And she's actually a daughter of a previous Surgeon General. And the first thing she said was, to be in the position I'm in the civilian world, I would have to be a white male 30 years older. So the military offers you, this is a recruiting plug, the military offers you a lot of advancement very, very quickly. One of the really cool things is, like those young second lieutenants, nobody in their right mind at Baptist or Humana would put them in a helicopter with an intubated patient and a brain injury and think they were going to get them alive from one place to the other, right? But we had to figure that out. So back to your question, I definitely would read lots of journal articles on how people are being successful. My best friend just retired from the Army and is now a COO of St. Clair Hospital. I think it's a Catholic organization in Seattle. And he did 4 or 5 things that sound so basic to Army people. I don't know if it'll sound basic to you, but I shared it with your professor at dinner. First week, he wrote a letter to everybody in the organization. Hey, I'm Pat Ahern, I'm from Michigan, came from nothing, I got a few kids, spent 30 years in the Army, hoping to learn a lot from you guys. See, that's who I am. Second thing, he went to eat in the dining facility. People were freaking out that the CEO is eating in the dining facility. Now, what are you doing down here? It's like, I'm hungry. So, third thing, he took donuts to his staff on night shift on Christmas Eve. His wife and him, like, what are you doing here? It's like, I want to thank you for working. I know you're working and I'm not. Last thing was we had a flu epidemic in Washington where every hospital was booked, couldn't move anywhere. After his 10 or 12-hour day in a suit, he put on scrubs and went to the ER 2 nights in a row. Just being visible, we call it present in the military. It's a huge character trait that we're trying to define better and better all the time. But being present is huge for your subordinates. And if you show that you care, back to the Eisenhower thing, or back to the Maya Angelou, if you show people that you care, they're going to give you a lot of slack when you mess up. But you're gonna start out at different levels, and you're gonna be competing. Make no mistake about it. It was much harder to be a captain in the United States Army than it is to be a colonel. Right? They think you get smarter with each rank. It's not true. I'm still 2.7. Right? But when you're starting out, resist the temptation to backstab people or to one-up people. Be gracious. Be humble. I trust you. Your good leaders are watching that. They are definitely watching that. And that comes from the values you guys have. Again, you have a lot on their hands. You are way ahead of the game having the spiritual values that you have. I'm still searching for those. If I had those, I wonder how much more confidence I could have with leading people. So Did I answer the question a little bit?
Well, yes, but may I ask it a little bit different?
Yeah.
How does someone, you listed some things about how to advance and how to be a good leader in the hospital system, but like how, I guess I'm just trying to see it from a military perspective, like how does it look like? You know, what does it look like for someone to advance? Like what is the steps that people go through? Like what do they start out with and then what do they go through to get to somewhere?
Yeah.
Is what I'm trying to see.
I would refer you to the book that Give and Take, because he took every job they asked him to do. And I can relate to that. In the Army, like, I never called, we have a Human Resources Command in Washington, D.C. I never called them, I really, really want this job. They always called me, I need you to go to Miami next week. Really? Is there a place in the Army in Miami? I'm there. You know, great. Do whatever job they give you as well as you can do and learn as much to the right and left as you can. The guy in Give and Take, he went and learned marketing and research and advertising. He had nothing, he had no knowledge about that. So all those tools, the tools that make me a good administrator, the two jobs, one was being an operations officer. I learned how hospitals run, and I understand how to task people and move people around. The second one was being the chief of a primary care clinic, because that's the engine of a hospital. You're learning referral management, you're learning templating, you're learning models, you're learning all kinds of things. So those two jobs, when I think about how I'm somewhat successful as an administrator, it's because of those two jobs. Those are not jobs an emergency nurse should ever have. I never should have those jobs. If somebody thought I could do it. So take every job they offer you and do it the best you can. But it's going to take time. You're young, you're starting out. But and never ever again take credit for your people's work. I've always been confused about why leaders do this. Because sooner or later somebody's going to find out you don't know what you're talking about, right? Right? 2.7. So sooner or later somebody's going to say, hey, who do you work for? I work for Groves. Who do you work for? You're pretty sharp. I work for Groves. Who do you work for? Sooner or later the team is going to say, I work for Groves. And they're going to go, Groves. You must be okay, right? So if you give credit to everybody, and the same converse to what Mike Franz asked me, why do you take responsibility for my mistakes? Because I can, right? I'm an adult. I'm a major. You're a lieutenant colonel. You're a major. And I know you're a good guy, and you made a mistake, and I don't need to know why. It's the same reason General Lyons protected me when I was getting in trouble for this soldier's death. He never asked me what happened. He knew it wasn't because John Groves was doing something for John Groves, right? So your values are going to far exceed your reputation. And if you're genuine and authentic like that, that's going to help you rise to the top. But not backstabbing, not looking to one-up people, not demeaning other people. Those things are toxic. And there's a reason we call people that have leadership traits like that toxic.
Thank you.
Yeah, who else? Yes?
Do you enjoy what you do? And if so, was it something that was acquired, or did you know that you liked it all the time? I guess my question is, do you wake up every morning excited about going to work? Or
Your professor asked this question at dinner.
or-
Yeah. So for 20 years I was at the bedside, and it really took me a long time to get good at being a true emergency trauma nurse, a really long time. So when I shifted behind a desk 10 years ago, I wondered if it was going to work, you know. The single skill that gave me the success to be a good administrator was the same skill I learned as an emergency nurse. It's called triaging, right? Things come flying at you at the executive level all the time, like something could hit the papers tomorrow, or Congress could call with a complaint. I think the best way to answer your question is I get up in the morning excited to go to work with the team I'm working with. I go to war with those guys. I mean, they're just so unselfish, brilliant, risk-taking, in it for the team. I mean, it's just fun to go to work. I mean, that's the one thing I'm going to miss so much after 30 years is like, how am I going to stay intellectually stimulated with a group of people who could make a ton of a lot more money in the civilian world, right? But they're staying in to serve their country. Again, finding your life's work. What's bigger than you? And even if you're not making a lot of money and you're doing that, it's going to be so rewarding. You're going to want to get up in the morning and do it. And when you don't want to get up in the morning and do it, find some other job. Don't be afraid to walk. Good question. Yes?
I just want to thank you for your service.
Oh, thanks for letting me serve. It's been a wonderful trip. I never would have thought it'd be 30 years. It's been great fun. Yeah.
When you're faced with a decision and it's one of those that's really obscure, you don't know how to answer it, and it has some serious consequences, how do you approach it?
Yeah, good question. So my other best friend that was in Iraq with me, I called him my consigliere after The Godfather. You guys seen The Godfather, right? You know what his favorite answer to those questions was? Let me think about it. Don't think you have to answer every question right on the spot. It's your nature, especially having daughters. They call you, Dad, I need some. Boom, you want to jump. Don't do that. Resist doing that. Right? Sit back and do a rhetorical. What do you think you should do? Or better yet, take 24 hours. Almost every time David took 24 hours and came back, he had the answer. So, and if you make the mistake, like I say, I'm an ER guy, so I shoot from the hip. 80% solution, I'm good. I'm going to miss 20% of the time. And when I do, I'm going to recorrect quickly. Bad news doesn't get better with time. I'm going to apologize to you and say, hey, I screwed up. I misjudged you. I thought you were selfish. I was wrong. I see you're a really hard worker. People will give you a second chance. Yeah, there's not too many, not to sound dramatic, but I promised myself after being at war for 12 months at 5 o'clock at night, if somebody's legs weren't blown off and coming to my door, you know, I'm going home, right? There's not that many life and death decisions being made. And you have faith. You've got something I don't have. So think about it, you know, pray about it, ask for perspective. I'm pretty sure the answer is going to come to you. And if you have a mentor or a close friend, I mean, the people who get in trouble the most, I ask them, when you were, an example, you're lazy. Do you have good friends? Yeah. I said, well, either one of two things has happened. Either your friends are lying to you, or you don't have good friends. Right? Because if I had my good friends knew I was doing what you were doing, they'd be getting on a plane to come whip me. Like, what are you doing not taking care of people, gross? What's going on? Right? Surround yourself with people that are going to be honest with you. Because feedback's a gift. That's my commander's favorite line. Feedback is a gift. I don't need people telling me I'm great and wonderful. I don't learn anything. It feels good, but I don't learn anything from it. What I learn from it is, hey, your medals are upside down, sir. They were just upside down last time I was wearing them, and Isabel had to fix them for me. After 30 years, you think I know how to put this thing on together. I don't. Right? Those things aren't really that important to me. What's important is, you know, looking out for the other guy. Yeah, good question. People else? Yes.
So you mentioned that one important skill is being able to speak to your supervisors and other people to call people in check. And you said like how it's difficult for us to speak to people who are older than us. And especially for those of us who have more like introverted or like passive personalities. Were you always that way, or how would you recommend like developing that skill?
Great question. So 65% of the military leaders are introverts. They're not me. So there's help. There's hope for everybody, right? Right? That's important because I never knew that. I was like 65%? No, it can't be. Yeah, they have to work at it really hard. But back to your first part of your question, how do you speak to them? It goes back to being authentic. Like if you knew what the ribbons and patches, particularly on my shoulders, were, you would know a lot about me. You would know that I've been to combat. You would know that I have a Bronze Star. You would know a lot of things. You walking into a room at how old?
21.
They know that. So you go in there and say, look, I'm only 21 years old. I'm trying to figure this out. I got it that you're my mother's age, but I really need you to do this and this for me because the organization is suffering. You can't hide how young you are. I can't hide. People that don't have right shoulder patches, we call these right shoulder patches and stripes, they know you've been to combat. And they get into leadership positions and they've asked me that same question. How do I lead other people who've been to combat? I said, you stand up the first day and say, look, I've never been to combat. Right? Expose yourself. Be real. They're probably going to give you a big break. But if you walk in there like the second lieutenant from West Point that read the doctrine, knows the rules, and here's how you lead, they're going to let you walk off a cliff. Right? Good question. But 65% of the military leaders, general officers, are introverts. Yeah.
I noticed on your uniform you have the catechist, and then you have a rod of Asclepius or whatever. Why both?
So which is which? Point. This one you're looking
Yeah,
at?
that's the catechist.
This is a caduce, a medical caduce, and it has a snake in there.
Yeah, the catechist.
Yeah. Sorry, girls. That's right. I didn't use the Daniel thing. So they asked me to talk about risk taking. Daniel took a lot of risk, right? Opened up the window, right? Like, think about it. There's always ways to get through by just having faith in who you are. But that represents the medical command, and then there's an N inside there if you're a nurse, or an M if you're a medical service corps, and then nothing if you're a doc. And then this thing over here,
Down
This?
underneath your.
This thing?
Yeah.
that's the unit I was deployed to Iraq with. If you go to combat in this dress uniform, that's the patch that I was saying earlier is a right shoulder patch. When I'm in fatigues, this patch is on my right shoulder and just designates you've been to war, combat. Yes?
So my guess is that you have a lot of people who come to you on a day-to-day basis. Some people just want to maybe have relationships with you and get to know you because they see you as a positive mentor.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever get to a point, and if so, what do you do after that point, where people, they'll come to you a lot and, you know, want to seek some type of wisdom, or they want to partner with you or something, and you're like, I just need space. Do you continue to pursue a relationship, to build a relationship, or you kind of like hold back and like, all right, I gotta go?
I learned a long time ago, if I don't address a problem when it's a molehill, it'll be a mountain. So I always have time for people. I just collaborated with a Baylor resident to write an article. Ironically, I had written the intro and the end of it, and he did all the nut work. So a major, pretty young officer, and I are collaborating on an article, which is good for me too. But yeah, as a leader, the day you say I don't have an open door policy is the day your problems start happening. Yeah, and you want people to get in front of your door. Like, people come to my door and some subordinates will say, why do you take everybody in? And this is a great thing to remember. If people are complaining because their employees are coming to you and not their first-line supervisor, this is what you tell them. Then you need to get in front of my door. Right? Because if they're coming to me, that means they don't trust you. Or you're not listening to them. But don't complain about it. Just get in front of my door. You can sleep outside my door if you want to solve the problem. And that visual is like, I'm not sleeping outside the boss's door. But they really understand I must not be giving my people what they need. But now I never turn people away. But I don't always answer all their questions. Don't get me wrong. I defer, like, hey. In fact, just the other day I had somebody come in, and 3 times I said, can you hold on a second? I turned to the computer, introduction, done. What else you need? Oh, I know who can fix that. Introduction, and I do it right there while they're in the office, so I get it done. And then those people know enough that if I ask for their help, they're going to reach out to that person. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's kind of the 2 questions. Would you say that you're successful in kind of keeping work separated from your family life? And if so, what are some?
Not good. So, fascinating article, July, a 2-star, soon to be 3-star general named Goss committed suicide. And not the first general officer that shot himself. And you can read the didactic investigation on Google, just Google it, and it basically says he had no work-life balance. His balance was his job, working out, and his family. And he had this thing called imposter syndrome, where he didn't feel he was ready for the next job. Interesting, huh? 2-star general, going to be a 3-star. He was an armor officer, but he was going to be in charge of all of Air and Space Command. And so he felt like, I don't know anything about Air and Space, and he killed himself. So I don't think I've done a good job balancing work-life. Yeah, I don't think many of us do. And it's something you've got to watch, because they're going to be there long after the Army, and long after your career. I'm a bad person to ask advice from that on. My wife and girls probably could ask better. Being away for a year is understandable, but when you're home, like I said, I've tried to do the 5 o'clock thing and put boundaries on it. I actually asked my wife not too long ago, let's have lunch every Tuesday and Thursday. And have we had lunch yet? No. But you gotta carve out time for them. You gotta carve out time for them.
Have you heard anybody who is successful enough? Because I've yet to meet someone.
I have, yeah. I have. Some people are really confident and really good at what they do and make it look easy. They'll come in your office and like, it's 5 o'clock. What are you doing here? I'm like, I'm working. Well, I'm leaving. And that's the other thing. I'm not impressed with people that work till 7 or 8 o'clock, and I don't do that too much in this job. But I'm telling you, people who are doing that, what that sends a message to me is you can't prioritize. It doesn't tell me you're a good worker. It tells me you're a bad worker, actually. And people who wait till the boss leaves to leave, I hate those people. I hate those people. Go home when you need to go home. And what really impresses me is when somebody sends up in a little meeting and go, look, I'm sorry, it's 4:30, my kid's got a soccer game, I need to go. Go. Right? Go. That impresses me. Because that tells me your priorities are probably better off than most of the people in that room. Yeah, good question. That's a great one. Thank you for asking that. We're right at 8 o'clock. Steph, your call? All right. Thank you for having me. It's been awesome.